Hi everyone, this is me, Kanak Sanjay Urkudev from Group 101, and our today's topic is Freud's psychoanalytical theory. Psychoanalysis is the part of larger movement known as depth psychology, which argues that the most important aspects of personality lie below the level of conscious introspection and are not visible to those who confine their observation to superficial feature of social behavior. All depth psychologists make use of iceberg metaphor. Just as only ninth of an iceberg is visible above the surface of the ocean, so only a small portion of personality is apparent in what people do and think in the ordinary course of everyday living. People are not aware of, or at least cannot articulate the reason for their own behavior. For this reason, overt behavior of the type assessed by trait psychologists is of little interest. The more appropriate focus in what lies below. Although we present psychoanalysis as an alternative to trait psychology, in historical terms, the two approaches developed contemporarily and largely in the isolation from each other. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, lived from 1856 to 1939. Vienna and London were different on almost every conceivable dimension. That is, in psychology, this difference was apparent in the difference between psychometrics and the psychoanalysis in fine art. It was reflected in the difference between the representationism and expressionism. Whereas trait psychology developed as a collective product of many investigators, psychoanalysis is largely the product of one mind. Their ideas were not wholly original. Some of his most central concepts had been popular in philosophy, psychology, and medicine for years. Building on this tradition, however, Freud's inspiration came both from his work in the clinical and his observation of everyday work about him. Now, let's discuss about the first dynamic psychology. It is commonly thought that the concept of unconscious and mental process and of the psychological caution of mental illness both trace their origin to Freud and this theory of psychoanalysis. To the contrary, both ideas have a long and distinguished history before Freud. The introduction of these ideas into scientific medicine began around this era. Mizwan was no crackpot astrologer. The scientific community of the 18th century enlightened was fascinated by the phenomena of action at a distance. The two clearest examples of this principle were gravity in the apocryphal tale of Newton by the attraction of the earth for an apple on a tree. Although Mizwan's theories sound wild, in practice he was successful in curing many patients whose affiliation has esteemed other practitioners. He moved from Vienna to Paris, where he set up a practice patronized by many members of the court of King Louis. In the course of their work, they conducted many what well stand as the earliest controlled psychological experiments. Nothing happened when he passed the tree that had been magnetized, but upon reaching the last one, the patient promptly fell into a crisis. In a certain when the mesmerist made magnetic passes unbeknownst to the patient. A number of physicians, notably Braid and Isdell, employed the technique to induce anesthesia before surgery. Braid coined the term hypnotism for the procedure after the Greek word for sleep. But the introduction of chloroform and other chemical anesthetics, which were both more reliable and more acceptable to materialistic worldview of the scientific establishment, led quickly to its demise. Interestingly, similar phenomena could be induced by means of hypnotic suggestion. This suggested to Charcot that hypnotizable individuals shared the same underlying pathology as hysterics. Freud was initially trained as a neurologist and he distinguished himself in both neuroanatomy and neurosurgery and did research on the aphasia and effects of cocaine. However, the young Freud was first and foremost a clinical practitioner interested in the problems of individual patients. It was this concern that led him to study the Charcot and Barhème in France, where the study of hysteria was well advanced. Although drawn at first towards Charcot and his somatogenic theory, Freud eventually sided the Barhème and those members of the first dynamic psychiatry who were attempting to develop a psychogenic account of these mysterious syndromes. From this kind of clinical investigation, this concluded that the hysterics suffer from reminiscence. More generally, they asserted that all of are in fact affected by ideas and memories of which we are not directly aware.
Hey, myself Nitin Yadav, and my topic is the psychopathology of everyday life. So, just a year later, Fred published another of his most popular books, The Psychopathology of Everyday Life. The topic of the piece was the psychology of errors, what I have since come to called Freudian slips. So I forgot what I was about to say. So Freud drew attention to errors in memory as well as in action, especially the phenomena of screen memory. Despite all that has occurred in the first 5 or 6 years of our lives, all that is preserved for most of us are a few fragments of utterly banally events without any apparent significance or emotional involvement attached to them. So last summer, I renewed my acquaintance with a certain young man of academic background. I soon found out that he was familiar with some kind of psychology publications. So he ended a speech of impassioned Ferrer with the well-known line of Virgils, in which the unhappy Dido commits to it posterity her vengeance on Ananias, or rather, he wanted to end in its way, for he could not get hold of the quotation and the tried to conceal an obvious gap in what he remembered by the changing the order of words. So, exorior, ex nostrix, obvious alter. How stupid to forget a word like that. By the way, you claim that one never forgets a thing without some reason. So I should be very curious to learn how I came to forget the identity pronoun aliquis in this case. I took up the challenge most readily, for I was hoping for a contribution to my collection. There ensued the following train for free associations. The word aliquis, liquus, reclivin, fluidity, fluid, Simeon of trend, which relic the young man had seen. The equation, the Jews engaged in the ritual blood sacrifice, an article he had certain read in Italian newspaper on Saint Augustine view on women, an old man named Benedict. So Then the next one is jokes and their relation to the unconscious. So, in correspondence concerning draft of the dream book, Freud friend and colleague Wilhelm Fels remarked that dreams were full of jokes. This led Freud to attempt an analysis of the psychology of humor. In discussing this book, we should warn the reader that Freud's sense of humor was quite different from what is commonly expected today. And as true as God shall grant me all things good things, Doctor, I sat beside Solomon Rothschild and he treated me quite as his equal, quite familiarly. So, familiar stands for the first thought, millionaire stands for the second, familiar stands for them both. However, the punchline has to be analyzed to extract the underlying meaning. In doing so, the audience gets the joke. And the another one is classical psychoanalysis. So, from experiences, anecdote and analysis such as these, Freud diverted the insight that we do not necessarily know why we do what we do, and that behavior may have a deeper significance that its surface appearance might suggest. This deeper meaning is rooted in conflicts concerning ideas and impulses, which are typically sexual in nature. So this sort of conflicts produce anxiety, letting the person to defend himself against this mental pain by rendering the confluential idea and impulses unconscious. All of this was apparent to Freud by 1901. He wrote the book on jokes simply to illustrate his point about mental life in a different way, and to show how psychoanalysis could answer a frequent but puzzling psychology questions. What makes a joke a joke? For the next 38 years, he worked these insignificance into a comprehensive theory of the mind, which made special reference to personality or psychoculture factors. So, what follows is a presentation of classical psychoanalytic theory, which emerged from 1905 to 1920 about mental life in a different way, and to show how psychoanalysis could answer a frequent but puzzling psychology questions. What makes a joke a joke? For the next 38 years, he worked these insignificance into a comprehensive theory of the mind, which made special reference to personality or psychoculture factors. So, what follows is a presentation of classical psychoanalytic theory, which emerged from 1905 to 1920, and which is best represented by the Freud 5 lecture on psychoanalysis. Introductory lectures on psychoanalysis and the new introductory lectures on psychoanalysis, while not intended in any way to be a historical account. We will have an occasion to describe some of the way in which the theory evolved in Freud's own mind. For other accounts, see Bloom, Hall, and Landesi, Monte, and Soloway. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
The theory of intensities. Freud's fundamental assumption was the personality is rooted in the conflict between the institutional forces on one hand and environmental force on the other. Essentially, Freud's view of the personality is that the tension direction based on the hydraulic model. Water is the motion exerts the pressure on its container, such as the dam or valve, creating a flow that must be stopped or rechanneled. If it is stopped, it will continue to build up the pressure with damaging results. as with the water's works, so with its personality, instincts strive for the expression in the term of the both thought and action. But the conflict with the environment force must be controlled. Personality. Freud used the term character in the broadest sense, consisting of the person's habitual mode of the adaptation to conflicts between the internal and external forces. Freud's descend in four components to an instances. Its source is bodily need, which must be satisfied. Its aim is to eliminate the sources of need. Its impactors is the amount of the force or energy associated with the instinct, and its object is the behavioral or the conjunctive activity that will accomplish the aim. Upon the further reflection, however, the Freud noticed that the people appear compelled to repeat the unpleasurable as well as the pleasurable experiences. For example, a common children's game involves making some favorite object disappear and then reappear to view. Moreover, the adults were often plagued by the repeated romantic imaginary fantasies and the daydreams of the sort familiarity to anyone who has ever been in the series, accidental or being embraced in the public. And according to the Freud, the desires for the pleasure and the quietude are separate complementary, but in final analysis, the latter is the fundamental interesting, but taken to the logical extreme, such as the statement seems paradoxical. The ultimate state of the sequences of the living things is death. Later in his career, Freud, 1924, proposed a new classification of the instances, eros, included the life and the sexual instances, those concerned with the continuity of life, thanatos, or the death instance. Further, never fully developed his notation of death instinct through the World War I convinced him that the drive towards the self-destruction existed. How else to explain how such a less orgy of the violence and death could occur? While acknowledging the existence of the thanatos, then Freud focused most of his systematic think on eros, particularly in its sexual aspects. Our personal presentation of the Freud's theories had his emphasis in discussing the sexual instincts. However, it is crucial to bear in mind that Freud defined sexuality very broadly, so that it went beyond intercourse and orgasm to include many different objects, all which of the sources in the desire of pleasure. The structure of the mind. Freud's earliest theory of the mind, put forth in the interruption of dreams, is called as topographical because it maps the mind into several compartments holding various types of the mental contents. The first of these, called system CS or consciousness, contain those ideas, memories, impulses, and action which of the person is presently aware. Of course, Freud recognized that we are not simultaneously aware of everything that we know or that is going on around us. We focus on our attention on some things and either filter others out, fail to pick them up, or actively ignore them. He identified as a system PCS conscious, which holds the dominant contents that are not presently active, and in consciousness, pre-consciousness content are potentially accessible to the person. Finally, he postulated a system UCS for the unconscious, which contains those ideas, impulses, and like that actively guide throughout and action, but are inaccessible to the consciousness. Unfortunately, as Comiskey in 1980 had noted, some confusion has been caused by the Freud's inconsistent definitions of these terms. At the time, he asserted that material system UCS was in the principle, and the nature of the primary process things means that the people can't depend on idea alone to satisfy their needs in the absence of the real thing, but ultimately of course it's not enough. For this reason, a second set of the mental process must be developed and come into play. They were named the ego by Freud. Its function is to provide the first occasion of the development of the object relationships in which the individuals find the object approximately satisfy the instinctual drives. The ego is objective rather than the subjective. It has ability to distinguish external objects from the internal representation of them, and Freud summarized the picture by saying that the ego must have served three harsh matters: the instincts arising from the ideal demands of the physical reality and structures of the society. And these three functions, ideal ego, superego, are the prenatural conflict, and conflict in the set is represented by his or her own discriminating system of the cathexis and anticathexis. This choice is in the turn motivated by the three kinds of anxieties. Relative anxiety stems from the danger of the physical world. Neurotic anxiety is due to the dangers possessed by social world. The ego performs its mediating function by engaging in a variety of the defensive maneuvers designated to deflect, suppress, and distinguish internal demands. And next, it is moral anxiety. It reflects the danger of the consciousness. The mechanism of the defense, all the defense mechanisms are irrational in that their purpose is to deny, dissatisfy, or the falsify. They persist in adulthood, he said, because these defenses effectively prevent the ego from ever becoming strong and ever to get along with them. The problem with the repression, and its big one, is that it requires such an enormous expenditure of the energy that there is little left over for the conjunctivity and behavioral activities. And because of this repressive barrier is started with the weak points, unacceptable materials can be forced way through NEV for these reasons. Other more elaborate maneuvers develop in order to support and supplant repression. In project, for example, the individual attributes his or her unacceptable feelings and wishes to someone else. In this way, the people deny responsibility for unacceptable urges, and that is the fear of the social structures. One's instinctual impulse will run wild into reality and anxiety of some or something out of there. And a reaction formation occurs when the person transforms unacceptable impulses into their opposite, love into hate, hate into love, like that. In this way, the person hides his or her true wishes by displaying and acknowledging ones that does not cause anxiety. They give away when an attitude or when is displayed in an extravagant, persistent, and inflexible manner. Okay, and what can it do? The defense mechanism illustrated in important features of the psychoanalysis, such as the depth psychology. In the case, the behavior arises from a source which keep hidden from oneself and others. Whatever one's intermediate motives may be, they are always derivative, somehow or primitively sexual and aggressive instincts. Moreover, the operation of the defense means that any activity is overdetermined. That is, any action can satisfy one of many instinctual sucking, thus gratifying hunger and thirst. Kissing too hard can be an act of aggression. For the farmers and gardeners, till the soil and reaping the harvest may satisfy one's sexual aggression, may stem from acting out or perhaps counterphobia. Alternatively, it may be a mechanism by which the unconscious instinct is transformed into the manifest through the found in supermarket checkout lines, the intersection of the dreams. Rather, they must be uncovered in each individual case by the means of reassociation. Two other defense mechanisms, regression and fixation, remain to be discussed. However, they take on meaning only the context of Freud's theory, so to which we now enter on. Thank you.
Can be maintained or controlled, but the oral aggressive cannot. It is responsible for the frustration. Anal character, as we talked about the anal stage, it is developed. The anal character is developed through toilet training. It is also of three types: anal expulsive, anal creative, and anal retentive. Anal expulsive actually are responsible for messy, irresponsible, disorder or wasteful character of an individual, and anal creative By contrast, it develops the attribute of charity, philanthropy, and generosity. Finally, to talk about the anal retentive, it develops an interest of collecting and saving things. Next, to talk about the phallic character, it is the development of the individual. The male demonstrate the castrated and the female resents having been castrated. So finally, to talk about the psychosexuality of an individual, Freud concluded that the personality may be the conflict between the individual's demand and the environmental contrast. So it is based on these two factors how a personality is being developed. So let's talk about the psychosexual development and character structure. It is mainly of 5 stages of development. It consists of 5 characters. They are genital character, oral character, anal character, and phallic character. Actually, the genital character is also comprised of 2 parts. They are fixation and regression. Fixation is the process of development which individual encounter at the earliest stage of the development, and the regression is the stage when a person changes from one stage to other. They faces anxiety, frustration. This is regression. Next, to talk about the oral character. They are also of 2 types, oral dependent and oral aggressive. Oral dependent can be maintained or controlled, but the oral aggressive cannot. It is responsible for the frustration. Anal character, as we talked about the anal stage, it is developed. The anal character is developed through toilet training. It is also of 3 types: anal expulsive, anal creative, and anal retentive. Anal expulsive actually are responsible for messy, irresponsible, disorder or wasteful character of an individual, and anal creative, by contrast, it develops the attribute of charity, philanthropy, and generosity. Finally, to talk about the anal retentive, it develops an interest of collecting and saving things. Next, to talk about the phallic character, it is the development of the individual. The male demonstrate the castrated and the female resents having been castrated. So finally, to talk about the psychosexuality of an individual, Freud concluded that the personality may be the conflict between the individual's demand and the environmental contrast. So it is based on these 2 factors how a personality is being developed.